Thank you again for tuning in, and welcome back to Oh and Another Thing. If you are listening on Spotify, check us out on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, check us out on Spotify. Subscribe, both places. Leave us comments, leave us ratings, whatever you can do. Welcome back again. We have a great pod for you today. We've had a busy week of news, a lot going on. Yesterday we had testimony in front of the Senate. We've had Senate testimony all week long, including Dr. Fauci talking the other day about the grave threat of a second wave that is, I guess they're saying, destined to happen. It seems destined to happen. It's happened every other major flu or pandemic we've had. Fauci was warning about that earlier in the week to the Senate, saying if we don't act quickly, we are in dire trouble. And we had the same thing yesterday from Rick Bright, the ousted, as they like to say, the ousted vaccine expert who was in charge originally of helping to finding the vaccine for coronavirus or COVID-19 or whatever phrasing we want to use for it. He was fired for not pushing hydroxychloroquine, or so he feels that way. He filed a whistleblower complaint, and he testified to the Senate yesterday. That, again, is Rick Bright. And he had warnings about how we are in for the darkest winter in our history if we don't have a totally together, I can't think of the right words for it right now, I don't have the quote in front of me, but a good national strategy, essentially, to deal with the coronavirus finally in the fall and in the winter to help us ease that second wave and ease the third wave. A lot of stark warnings, a lot happening in the Senate this week, a lot of bad questions from some Republicans. Let's talk about that just real quick here before we dive too much further in. I was watching yesterday, and I'm not a doctor. Trust me, I am not a doctor. All of this is unwarranted opinions. This is an unwarranted opinion-based podcast from someone who just reads a ton of news, enough books, and has been doing it long enough that I feel I have good opinions on the things, and I can at least say them articulately enough that it's good. So, that being said, some of the questions yesterday, especially from, I forget who it was, but I believe he was from Florida. He was a doctor from Florida, and he was talking about how, in the case of hydroxychloroquine, it's fine, and again, not a doctor here speaking and criticizing an alleged doctor, criticizing another doctor. So, real meta stuff here. But saying that because doctors all the time will prescribe off-label use for drugs, which is totally not unheard of. My dad had talked about that before. My dad is a pharmacist. He prescribed drugs, and at the dinner table, occasionally he would bring up, different things that you can use for different things, just things that would come up. So it's not totally unheard of, and he's not wrong there. However, his argument against Rick Bright was that because this happens for some cases with some drugs in absolutely particular cases that doctors will do this, that it must be fine to do across a wide scale without testing. And how absolutely crazy is that to say that in a situation where you have literally more than 1 million people, I think it's 1.4 million people at this point in the United States have been infected and tested positive for the coronavirus. 85,000 people have died of it. So to say that just because a doctor will occasionally prescribe this drug for this other condition, that it can be done for literally everything for everybody, I think is a little bit risky and a wild thing to say, and quite a thing to say while trying to attack the doctor or show that the doctor who was in charge or person in charge of coming up with the coronavirus vaccine was doing a shitty job doing that and deserved to be taken out of their position by the president. Even though a House committee investigating the demotion of Rick Bright to a lesser role in, I believe, the National Health Services or the NIH or something like that, not the job he had before, is the result of some retaliation from higher-ups. That's what they ruled, and that's what the investigation has said so far. So there is legitimacy to Rick Bright's whistleblower complaint here that he feels that he was demoted because he would not help push hydroxychloroquine and other cures that was being pushed by the administration during his pressers a few weeks ago without adequate testing and adequate research behind it. So shout out to all that going on, and shout out to Rick Bright. Just some things for you to know. That being said, the CDC put out their guidelines today. It's a 6-page little document for schools, businesses, and others to help them enter the next phase of the coronavirus pandemic. The guidelines have been released after many states have already begun to lift their restrictions anyway. And worth noting that they are far from the same detailed guidelines and restrictions that were put out a couple weeks ago. Flashback, 2 weeks. You'll remember. I think it was during a Friday news dump. A story came out that somewhere in the higher ups of the White House, they decided they didn't want to publish the CDC guidelines that had been approved by the CDC prior because they were too specific and not vague enough, therefore not leaving enough wiggle room for states and localities to open prematurely. A premature opening that we have been warned about multiple times this week alone again. But now we have these CDC guidelines that have been approved, and they are far less than what was already approved. And I feel like in a situation where, again, we are dealing with mass death, mass infection, granted, things are getting better marginally as we go along, that having a more specific, more detailed, more limiting approach to opening might be the safer bet. And I say this as New York State is opening. Central New York, I believe, today is pretty much the region that's able to open. The Finger Lakes, but regardless, all these places are opening now and beginning to open. And there's still so little known about what you can do once a place is open. Can you go there from a non-open place? Can you go to an open place? Can you go to a non-open place from an open place? Can you go from a non-open place to an open place? Can you go back and forth like that? Is it allowed? There are still too many unknowns. Can this open? Can that open? Can this open? Can that open? Do you have to wear this if you're open? Do you have to wear this inside? Do you have to do this? Do you have to do that? And the CDC put out a guideline that really doesn't do much but allow states to open up early and open up dangerously early. So that way, the president and the people in the White House and Republican lawmakers can say, well, look, everybody, the CDC put out these guidelines with our influence, and because of that, you guys can go get your haircuts. And shout out to Giovanna, who yesterday, if you're watching, you can see, gave me a mighty fine haircut on her own.
Show in the back.
Sick fade, Can they see it on the screen there? I don't know if they can see it on the screen. You can't see this on the podcast. It's not the most interesting thing showing off my haircut for the podcast. But, can they see it?
You'll see that fade.
You guys see it?
Undetectable.
Undetectable. Beautifully done. And this is...
I'm doing Bert next.
And we're doing Bert next. An argument for the people saying they need a haircut so bad and the men touting their weapons outside of state courthouses. Maybe you should try a little thing called trusting your wives and girlfriends to cut your hair. Because let me tell you...
Those men have girlfriends.
If they do, if you have it available to you, there are plenty of online tutorials, plenty of great videos for you to check out on YouTube.
Even a self one. The one we follow, he has a...
There's even self haircut videos for people that want so badly to go get their haircuts that they're willing to risk an infection. Do it at home. Learn a new task. Anyway, I digress. Trust your girlfriends, learn a new task, let them cut your hair. Significant other, anybody. No matter the relationship, trust them to cut your hair. You don't need to be up in an outrage about this. We can take our time. I'll digress from that. More news for us today. U.S. retail sales have plunged by 16% in April as businesses shut down and shoppers stayed home. I saw today that JCPenney's could be the latest retailer to go out of business. Terrible news for the Du Bois Mall that is already only standing on a Sears, I think. I don't know if the Sears is still there. But bad news for a lot of small town malls because there's a lot of these small towns, especially in like rural communities. I will say again, the town I'm from, Du Bois, shout out, go Cards, fuck the Beavers, we out here. Rovers can eat one. I'm saying all the high school mascots from my area. You're curious, but a lot of these malls in these communities can't really afford to lose any more stores or any more JCPenney's. We're going to have a lot of vacant malls, and I have a proposal for the vacant malls. It doesn't matter today because there's a lot of bigger fish to fry, but let me throw this out there. What if every mall in America that closes, we turn into a nature and wildlife preserve? So that way, children can go learn about the wildlife around them that is slowly being taken away by deforestation, and at the same time we can fight some of that deforestation and have these sweet open air like used to be malls covered in like forestry and birds and shit like that.
I love it.
That'd be pretty incredible, wouldn't it? It'd be fun. Anyway, I think I saw there is a mall who did that already in like maybe Tampa or something like that, where they'd closed the mall and they kind of turned it into a zoo type of thing. We could do that everywhere, and I think it would be sick. Granted, I'd rather us save the stores and the jobs, but if worse comes to worse, you need someone to maintain those places. There's always work. There's always work. And also this week, nearly 3 million more Americans filed for unemployment, bringing the total number of jobless claims in the past 8 weeks to a staggering 36.5 million. You can find more headlines like those on the Washington Post website, which is where I read them from. Shout out to the Washington Post. Give them a subscription if you want to. If not, just subscribe to me. All right. So, on to the business. Oh, boy. What day is today? Today is Friday. So, on Wednesday, right? Whatever the 13th was. We don't believe in days of the week anymore. We're trying to stick with just the numbers. On the 13th, the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, in a 4-3 decision, struck down Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers' extension of the state's stay-at-home orders, despite polling showing that most Wisconsinites supported the governor's actions, though less than had supported it the month prior, I will say. In the ruling, that was kind of part of a pretty big day for Republicans and pretty discouraging for those of us who enjoy democracy and freedom. I shouldn't be so extreme. I apologize. But it was a big day for Republicans, being that they won 2 elections, California's 25th, which they'll have to have the election for again in November. That is a special election that they used to replace Katie Hill. Katie Hill, you remember, had to resign her seat for bogus reasons because someone she had been having an affair with within her staff decided to use revenge porn to get back at her. A whole big mess. Totally wrong of Katie Hill to have to step away from her job because of that. Anyway, so now we have the special election. It's really short term, and again, the race is a rematch in the fall. Democrats are hoping they can change the turns in the fall, being that it will be a presidential election, and Democrats tend to turn out more for bigger ticket elections, which we'll talk about here as we go on. So again, a pretty big day for people that are easy to dislike, like Republicans, and pretty major victories for them as well. Kind of making back some losses that they had in the fall. You think about Kentucky, you think about the Supreme Court seat in Wisconsin that they lost. But it's a major victory for them in their underlying strategy, and it's interesting that it happened in Wisconsin because Wisconsin has kind of been the testing ground, the petri dish, as we called it on Medium this week, for a lot of Republican Party tactics. The new Republican Party tactic, which appears to be a lot of court packing and a lot of finding ways to stop Americans from having their true electoral voice heard by any means possible, whether it be stacking the courts so that way you can pass voter restrictions, be it so that states can require voter IDs, or that people are registered at their actual residence, which is a big problem for people in cities where people move a lot. Anything that they can do to suppress a vote and do it legislatively by packing courts, it allows them to do that. But it also allows them to do an even sneakier thing, which is even shittier, and that is take away the actual democratic principle of a democracy, which is that classic, if you want to think about it, as the ayes having it scenario where, you have enough votes, that voice is the voice that is heard. However, this ruling in Wisconsin is a prime example of the majority being outruled by the minority. As we stated in the opening of this segment here, polling had showed that 65%, I believe, of people supported the stay-at-home orders and the extension of the stay-at-home orders more specifically. Meaning that a majority of Wisconsinites who had been polled, and that's just who have been polled, and we can't make all of our laws based on polling, but a majority of those folks feel as if what is happening is good, they agree with it, and they wanted to stay home. However, now because Republican lawmakers in the state didn't agree with what the Democratic governor said that they should do, they took it to the state courts, which is an overwhelming 5-2 majority in their court, I believe it is, 5-3 majority, whatever it is, a majority for Republicans and conservative judges in their state Supreme Court in Wisconsin. with that, they take this ordinance that has passed by a governor who was duly elected, that is, again, won a majority of votes in 2018 to unseat Scott Walker, the former governor of Wisconsin, go in, undo the ruling by that Democratic governor who was, again, duly elected by the people, which should matter to the president because that was his whole argument during impeachment, was that Democrats were trying to undo the will of the American people by taking him out of office, which isn't undoing the will of the American people, taking the voice away of the governor of a state that was elected by voters in that state. Seems like the same kind of thing. But by doing this and taking away that ruling, Wisconsinites truly have been robbed of their democratic voice, because this says that no matter what happens if you go and vote, they did the same thing in Florida this year. If you go and vote for an ordinance, a city law, a county commissioner seat, anything like that, any ruling that those people make, anything they rule on, can be overturned in the state courts, can be overturned in the court system, as long as they have the judges to do it. And that is the real evil genius of the Donald Trump presidency. It's essentially like putting a clown out there on the side of the highway and saying, look what this guy is doing, while we burn literally all of these important documents on the side of the road here, and then they go to investigate those documents later and the documents are gone. Now, it's not a thing that happened, but it's a metaphor for what's happening, because what you're seeing now is Republicans have spent the past 3 or 4 years packing circuit courts, state courts, and just the court system in general with these backbench judges from all of these different, I don't remember what to call them, I don't remember the names of the organization right now, but they have these rosters of judges that are approved by conservative people high up in the decision-making wing of the conservative ecosphere, if you will. I know this sounds conspiracy theorist, but it's not. And they use that list. They go off these conservative judges and they place them throughout the country. And by doing this, they say that no matter what happens, be it a stay-at-home order to protect citizens in Wisconsin, or a law in Florida that allows convicts to vote after being convicted felons, they can either, one, go into the state house, take it to court, and have it thrown out. Have it taken down, voice gone, Republican ruling, what Republicans want to happen, as opposed to what the voters may want to happen. Again, it won't matter what you want to happen, as long as they can overturn it in a state court. Or if they have the votes in the state house to water down a ruling, or water down something that people voted for, like they did in Florida, where now, as opposed to the bill people voted on at the polls and passed at the polls in the most democratic process possible for passing laws and ordinances, actual citizens voting, to take that back to the state house and say, no, they have to pay off their court fees before they can have that. It takes away the impact of the law passed, and it's what Republicans want to do, and it's what they are doing, and it's what happened in Wisconsin to a T. Again, something that a large portion of the population agreed with, that a Democratic governor put forth, was struck down in the courts by conservative majority, because that is what their strategy is. The strategy is to take away, it's hard to word here, take away the democratic voice of the American people. The only way they can hold on to their power is by doing that, and by making it so that people feel like their votes in the end don't matter, which is essentially what happens every time they do one of these rulings. It makes it, a court passes a ruling that favors a conservative minority. And the only thing that we can really do to counteract that, as people who want democracy to thrive and democratic voters perhaps, is make sure that we don't miss an election. Because the only reason Republicans get away with this, being able to still be the governing party as a minority, do not forget that there are less registered Republicans now in this country than there are even independents. Democrats have I think a 9% margin over Democratic voters in this country, and that's just on registered voters alone. However, the only only advantage Republicans have, and because of this they get an unfair governing advantage, is that their people show up to vote in every fucking election. It is so frustrating. It doesn't matter if it is a state senator. It doesn't matter if it is a local comptroller. It doesn't matter if it is for the coroner. It doesn't matter if it is for a local ordinance on if a swimming pool can be built. These people go and they vote because somehow the Republican Party has found a way to get into their heads that everything does affect them one way or another, even if it's something that doesn't, like gay marriage or something. Even if it's some cultural issue, they have in their heads this will affect them, and because of that, they go and vote no matter what. So it's the Democratic Party's job now to get that into Democratic voters' heads and say, hey, what happens in this election, what happens in every election, be it now, be it 2020, be it 2024, 2022, any election that happens going forward, there's consequences to it, even if it's just what you think is a shitty local election. There are consequences to it, because if you don't go at the root level of democracy and say we need to protect our institutions, Republicans will continue to water them down until they are unrecognizable and hard to fight for anymore. And that is their goal. That is their goal, and the only way they hold power is to do that. Speaking of Republicans doing shitty things and holding literally the country hostage, more news this week coming out of the House is that they are passing, or working to pass today, a $3 trillion stimulus bill on top of the other stimulus bills we've already had. It's a good bill. There's a lot of really exciting things in it. There's continued payments. There's a stimulus package that would give us $12,000 checks up to $6,000 for some households. $1 trillion, literally $1 trillion for state and local governments, which they need because it's May, the 5th month of the year. We've been quarantined for roughly 3 to 2.5. Regardless, a larger portion of this year has been spent with states getting no money than has been spent with states and localities getting money. So they are cratering, and that cratering is also starting to affect everybody else. So there's money for states and localities in there, $1 trillion worth of it. There is money for rent, mortgages, and utilities, $175 billion worth of funding for that. Extensions of the $600 a week extension. I don't know what to call that. Unemployment benefit. That's expected to expire at the end of June, so they're trying to extend that through August. Money for food assistance programs, funds to make vote by mail easier, money for the post office, and of course, and almost most importantly, $75 billion for testing. The total of this bill, again, is close to $3 trillion. And it sounds like a lot of money, and that is because it is a lot of money. There is no sugarcoating that $3 trillion is more money than a lot of us ever could fathom. Trillion for a long time was one of those numbers that you used to say when you were a kid, joking around. Remember whenever you say, well, I have 3 trillion of them.
On par with gazillion.
On par with a gazillion, exactly. A trillion is on par with a gazillion. That's the kind of spending we're talking about here, and it is crazy, and it is a ludicrous amount of money. But remember that we are in a situation where we need a crazy and ludicrous amount of money to literally save the country from ruin financially, financially, economically, politically, and legislatively, everything. This coronavirus has done a number, and it's going to continue doing a number on us. So this shouldn't even be the last stimulus that they pass. So this $3 trillion, get ready for a 4 or a 5 trillion down the road, maybe. And I know that is a hot take because things are getting marginally better around the country. But marginally better does not mean ready to reopen. And ready to reopen does not mean financially boom and everything is back to normal. Again, there's 36 million people out of work today. 36 million people. That doesn't erase itself overnight. And they're saying 40% of those jobs don't come back. So we need this money for people. This isn't something that is unnecessary. The stimulus checks are not unnecessary for households to survive, for individuals to survive. The extra $600, I don't know if you're someone who has been getting unemployment, but that extra $600 is literally a lifesaver for some and at least a stress eliminator for a lot of other people. Makes a big difference. And these are things that are in this bill that matter and need to get passed. Now, there are other things in this bill that I am faulting Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer for not fighting for sooner. That, of course, is the vote by mail funding. We've known since this started that there is a good chance we get a second wave of the coronavirus, and that second wave comes in the fall. And in the fall is the 2020 election, an election that we have been told for the past 3 years means the life or death of our democracy. And something I'm buying into, because if you have been paying any attention to what's happening at the Department of Justice over the past 2 weeks with Michael Flynn and everything they're trying to muddy the waters with Obamagate, which isn't, real quick here, Obamagate isn't even a scandal. If you go and read, there's an NBC News article out right now that they did an investigation into what Trump could have even possibly been talking about, referring to the unmasking of Michael Flynn. Check it out. Takes down the whole entire scandal. And it's not a scandal worth noting. So the importance of this election hasn't changed in 3 years. The importance of this election hasn't changed in the past 3 months. It's gotten even more important, and we've known that. We've known we've been needing this funding for the past 3 stimulus bills, and we know that they've tried to get it in each of the past few stimulus bills. But why hasn't it been any in any of the past stimulus bills? We've known this was going to be an issue. We knew people were going to be having trouble paying their rents. We knew people were going to be having a hard time finding work, getting jobs, having money coming in. We knew all of this would be true. We knew all of it would be true, and it was fine to take these half measures at first. These small, okay, well, we'll take this for testing. We'll take this now. And do not forget, the only reason we are in a place right now where we need $3 trillion is because the government did such a shit job preparing us for the coronavirus. We were not ready for testing. Because we were not ready with enough testing, we were not able to know who had coronavirus, where coronavirus was, and the true impact it would have. Because, and I can't say this enough, and I can't stress this enough, we don't know who had it. By not knowing who had it, it made it really unenticing for people to go out to businesses and spend money places whenever there was a great risk that doing so could take a potentially life-threatening virus home to their families and themselves. Not an incredibly enticing trade-off of things there. Out and about to spend money, possibly die. Doesn't really work for most people. Because of that, that's where we are today. And do not forget, there is 85,000 people dead. There are 1,004,113 Americans infected alone with the coronavirus. We've known these issues are going to be persistent. We knew these issues weren't going anywhere. We've had, I think this is the fourth or fifth bill. There's been opportunity after opportunity for Democrats to say, no, this bill doesn't get passed. Republicans don't get the electoral win without this being in it. Because do not forget, the House has to pass a bill before the Senate can vote on it. Even if the Senate passes the bill first, the House must still pass it before it goes to the president. That is how democracy works. That is how governing works. That is how our government is set up to function. So anytime Mitch McConnell's Senate wants to say, we need something, they need to say to the Democrats in the House, we need something. Every time they come with that, Democrats should say, well, so do the American people. Don't forget that first bill, that first stimulus bill that got passed back in March, was not the product of Democratic framework. That was a Republican-framed bill, and it was framed like shit to benefit corporations and the travel industry. We know that. It's factual. It's been talked about and discussed for weeks. Because, again, that was allowed to happen. Because Pelosi and the Democrats didn't counter with a stronger bill immediately. They lost their voice over the course of the first, at least that first bill, and even up till now, because now they every time have to work around Republicans. And that shouldn't be how it is. When you are the governing party in Washington, when you are clearly the party with more power, as electorally, you have more registered voters, you have more people inspired to go out and vote for you now, You have seen nothing but undying support. Okay, I shouldn't say that. Not undying. The polls point to your favor. You have the power right now, and you have the House right now to do something important. And now, since you waited until the last bill in this process, possibly, to get the most for the American people, you have allowed yourself to be played by the Republican Party again. Because now they're saying that they don't want to spend the money, and they don't want to spend the money on what looks like a partisan bill by Democrats trying to get partisan goals passed, partisan goals achieved. And of course we know those partisan goals they're talking about are the vote by mail funding. It is protecting the post office, which is protecting jobs. It is getting money to American homes soon and quickly and adequately. Those are, for some reason, the most damaging things Republicans could have happen. And it speaks to the Republican Party that those are things that they don't want to happen and find as partisan garbage that we shouldn't be paying for. When in fact, it's the exact kind of partisan garbage we should be paying for. However, because they waited for the last bill to try to cram every single one of these across, it is not hard for Republicans to point the finger and say, oh, look what Democrats are doing now. They're using a tragedy to try to get partisan goals achieved. Can you believe this? Oh, there goes the outrage machine. And there goes your opportunity to actually get those important things like vote by mail passed. Because without vote by mail being passed, it's going to be a whole lot harder to elect Joe Biden as president, to elect anybody down ballot, to flip any seat. And because Democrats weren't willing to fight for that and allowed for it to be turned into a partisan thing, because, again, Schumer and Pelosi continue to take this stance of, oh, well, Republicans will come around. This is an important time for Americans. They'll come around. They care. What have we seen time and time again for the past decade is that Republicans don't give a shit about working people or Americans. So why would we trust them to start caring now? That first bill they put together should have signaled the whole game here. They don't care about American workers. They don't care about American families. They care about American corporations. They care about cruise lines. They care about airliners. They care about people that pull in billions and billions of dollars and give back hundreds and hundreds to people. That's what they care about. They weren't going to suddenly grow a heart out of nowhere and start honestly having good faith debates and discussions on policies to help benefit people. But yet Schumer and Pelosi allow themselves to get played time and time again. And it is so frustrating because, again, we live in a time that it is not hard to make something look partisan. But by not fighting hard enough and fearing that they would look overly partisan, now there isn't a chance to get vote by mail. There isn't a chance to get more funding for families unless Republicans want it. And that's the situation they've put themselves in. It is a losing situation for them and is a losing situation for American families because now we have to wait for Republicans to want to do things. And if we have to wait for Republicans who are now at a point saying, well, we don't have the money to do this, these are all partisan things, and the president saying he'll veto any bill now that comes across that is a Democratic bill, what have you done? And they need to change this. They need to, on this bill, they need to stand their ground, and I'm worrisome that they'll be able to. Again, thank you for listening. I hope I didn't dampen your weekend plans too much with how we decided to end the podcast today and the stream today. But thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching this week. Check us out on Medium. We've started writing over there. You can get all of your news from us there. Again, thank you for listening. Come back next week. Who knows what we'll have to talk about. Thank you for listening to Oh, and Another Thing. You've made it this far. You might as well subscribe and never miss an episode again. Have a good weekend.